Hey everybody, this is Eve West. Thank you for tuning into my YouTube channel. This channel is dedicated to a book I wrote. It's called Follow. It's a book about spirituality that looks at spirituality from not just a psychological standpoint, but also an earthly physical one as well. You know, typically when we read books about spirituality, we focus on the metaphysics, love, caring, sharing, creativity, and so forth. But this book also focuses on the reptilian brain, which is the part of the brain that, processes the five senses, which you can see, taste, touch, smell, and hear. And so there's an earthly aspect to us. So my book actually focuses a lot on sex. It focuses a lot on money, on religion, various topics that, people consider to be super duper sensitive, if you will, and controversial. So I do warn you in actually reading this book. I understand that people have very, emphatic, feelings, if you will, and viewpoints about those various topics. But this book is a feminine perspective about the holistic view of spirituality. So it's a feminine perspective about Adam and Eve, if you will, the feminine right brain, which is Eve, and the masculine left brain, which is considered to be Adam. My religious programming was Christianity, and so I use a lot of Christianity in the Bible to actually, unpack and uncover the different psychological and earthly aspects of a human being. Each of my videos is targeted toward a particular chapter that I wrote. I highly advise you to actually look at the video before reading the chapter. Just because, when you're reading something, sometimes, when you put your own perspective on something, you don't necessarily get what the author was trying to say. And so, I really wanted you to hear my voice and to see me in person, to see me actually speaking the words, as opposed to just going ahead and just putting your perspective, which I do want you to do. I do encourage, spiritual discourse and having discussions about a lot of the topics I talk about. However, I think it's very important that you get my perspective about the book as well, although I wrote it, so to speak. So it's good to get all perspectives and all sides, if you will. This particular chapter in the book is called The Fall. It's called The Fall. And I opened the chapter up with a scripture from the Bible, and it talks about how God caused the sleep to fall upon Adam and he slept. And, in the fall, I talk about, the sleep that God put upon Adam to be ignorance. Ignorance is what we consider to be sleep or what have you. Like when you look at the New Age, they often say, people are asleep and they're not awoken, if you will. And so really the sleep is ignorance. And that is, pretty much what spirituality is about awakening an individual to the holistic aspect of themselves, not just the metaphysical, but also the earthly. And so when we look at the fall, the fall of mankind and biblical texts in the book of Genesis, we see there's a separation. So there's a separation between Adam and Eve. Like I said before, Eve represents the spiritual, whereas Adam represents the earthly. And so whenever you're separating your consciousness becomes, you develop what I call an unconscious mind. And so I talk later on in the book about how the unconscious is actually birthed within our society, using the different constructs of the matrix, such as religion, education, media and entertainment, just various, the government itself, just all the different constructs, how they actually uphold the false ego and the separation between the left and the right brain. And so whenever you're separating Adam and Eve, you are actually creating an unconscious mind. And so I talk about in this particular chapter how that happened to me. So looking at this whole concept from the microcosm of my life, in which I call the fall. And so, in the fall, I just talked to you a little bit about who I am, my family structure. The familial structure is also a major, actually, I think it's one of the most important constructs that uphold the false ego. I talk about, my friends growing up and, my schooling, and I talk about, just various, things, getting married, having my daughter, and that type of thing, just kind of giving you an idea of who I am as an ego. I don't really like talking about myself so much, and I'm a very feminine ego. The more feminine your energy, the less egoic you are. And so, I think out of all the chapters, it was most difficult to write about myself. And even reading about myself, it's like I'm not even reading about me, which is a good thing, I suppose, because, some people are so wedded and attached to their egos, depending upon where their level of consciousness is. But, I definitely have a detachment between the person I'm writing about in the book, in the fall, the first chapter of the book, and the actual one that observes this ego, this avatar, if you will, that I play. So, in the fall, I talk about my family and growing up. My first name, the name that my mother gave me, is Courtney. And so, I open up with, what's in a name, basically. What you name your child is very important, because that name, really is the driving force, if you will, within your kid's life. It really gives purpose. I do believe that, there's purpose in names, if you will. And so my name being Courtney, my first name, it actually, if you look at the etymology of the name, it means from the court, and it means short nose. And so when you think about from the court, you think about justice. And when you think about short nose, you think about a truth teller. Pinocchio had a long nose, and so he was a liar, but I'm definitely a truth teller. And so, this definitely, as I started to awaken, definitely gave me a lot of information about my avatar and why my avatar is here. But it's so interesting because, I talk about spirituality in a holistic view. And most of my consciousness, although this limited perspective, which is the ego, is very feminine, most of my consciousness is very masculine. I have a very masculine consciousness on the astral, what I call it. If you're not familiar with the astral self, your astral or unconscious self is the self that you go to at night when you go to sleep. When you go to sleep, you shed your concepts of the matrix, or what I call it, or society. You leave your body at night. So, you're not a man, you're not a woman, you're not rich, you're not poor, you're not black, you're not white, you're nothing. You're absolutely nothing. And so as a result, you go to another dimension, if you will, to work out the restrictions that you face when you were within a physical body. When we're within a physical body on the hell realm, and I call this hell, that's why we say hello. And it's so interesting, as my third eye was opening, I said, wow, the creators of this false reality have us greet each other with hello, because this is hell. So that was just particularly eye-opening. But when you're within physicality, you have to follow rules and you have restrictions and things like that. And so, as a result of those restrictions, you can't necessarily do the things you want to do. And so that wanting does not go anywhere. It becomes birthed in your unconscious mind. And so you actually, at night, when you go to sleep and you leave your body and you shed all your concepts, you go to a realm where you act out the restrictions that you faced. So, I just talk about, basically growing up. I had a very, very difficult childhood psychologically, very difficult. I didn't have the best relationship with my mom. My mom is a very masculine energy, a very masculine, very imbalanced, masculine, oppressive energy. My energy is very feminine, I'm very much about justice and what's right, and I'm very much whimsical and, that type of thing. So she and I definitely clashed a lot, if you will, during my, during my childhood. I talk about, the separations that I had during childhood psychologically and the cause of that. I was sexually abused as a child. And so whenever a kid is sexually abused, they are separated from their body. And so, when you're abused sexually, it's the worst thing to damage the soul. And so you start to live more psychologically than physically. And so you lose your balance, so to speak. And so that was purposely done to actually deactivate the earthly aspect of myself, because in the astral realm, I'm considered a prostitute, a sacred prostitute in the astral realm. So I was purposely made saintly in this realm so I could be a prostitute and work out the frustrations that were as a result of my sexual deactivation in the physical. So, it's very interesting how this all comes full circle, if you will, and to actually discover that, that's my role, and that I'm very nice and sweet in the physical, but very hellish and evil and sadistic in the astral. It doesn't really, there's such a polarity between my ego and my astral self. So it's very different. But I talk about that separation. So that's one of the first things that's done to separate and damage the soul. And after my sexual abuse occurred, like I said, I just really had more psychic abilities. I became more empathic. And so an empath is just someone who absorbs people's energies. Empath is, if someone's happy, I feel happy. If someone's sad, I feel sad. I actually take everything on as myself. So I'm everyone and I'm no one. In a way. And so, but when you dissociate, despite the fact that you're very empathic, you still live within ignorance, because you interact with people as if they're, opposite of you. Although you take on the energy of everyone, you actually, it seems that everything is separate from you in a way. So there's an integration yet a separation in a way. And so, I talk a little bit about the Christ, if you will, just a little bit, because when you think about Christ, the Christ is the unchanging aspect of a person, the utmost integrity that you have. Whenever you're interacting with people in a different way, you are not living in integrity. So the way that you, for example, in this particular realm, the way that we interact with our mothers is not the way that we interact with our, lovers, or the way that we interact with our children is not the way that we're going to interact with someone on the street. And so as a result, although we consider this to be normal within the hell realm, so to speak, this is playing roles. This is playing roles when you're constantly readjusting yourself and you're not really realizing that you're interacting with an aspect of yourself. This is a dissociative personality, not in a clinical sense, but from a more spiritual sense, it's dissociative. And so this is what I start to do, and I start to interact with people in different ways to find love, if you will, to find home, to find Christ. And so, this was this was definitely the beginning of my psychological split. My sexual abuse was the beginning of my psychological split. So, after being abused, I really started to go through a lot of programming, especially when it came to relationships with my family. My mom always said we're creatures of habit, and so we adapt to our surroundings. But, as I was, growing up, I witnessed a lot of things in my environment, but I was always told not to do stuff. Like, for example, like profanity. My mom always said that profanity, is bad, and so I was scolded if I ever slipped up and used profanity. However, she used profanity all the time, and I was around her and my dad, and, they use profanity all the time. And so this causes, although this is a very small example, it caused a psychological split, because here I was immersed within an environment where profanity was used, whereas I was prevented from doing it. And so whenever you're putting the soul in situations like that, it actually fractures the person, and so it causes them to actually work against themselves where they're not conscious. I just put my whole, I guess what you would call idea of, or want or desire for cursing or using profanity in my unconscious. So I would just act that out in the astral realm. It was just a very difficult, being sexually abused and having a desire for sex cultivated at an early age. Yet my mother always taught me to deny my body. Denying the body was something that she definitely preached, if you will. And so, like, if I was at school and I saw a boy and I'm like, oh, I like this boy, he's really cute or something like that, my mom would always, insinuate that I was a whore or a slut or something like that. So, it was just very interesting being at war within myself, having been abused and having that sexual desire, yet not being able to ground that desire into reality. I talk a little bit about my dad, and growing up, I was very much daddy's little girl, but my dad was a raging alcoholic. There was two dads, if you will. Looking at his story, my dad's story is he grew up pretty poor, and he didn't have a lot. He joined the military very young, and he was just very miserly and so forth. And so, in hindsight, looking at his egoic story, I see how he came to be like that. But he had a whole lot of issues growing up, and so he drank heavily. And it was just different because I didn't know which daddy I was going to encounter every day. I didn't know if it was going to be, the raging alcoholic daddy, or if it was going to be, the daddy that, I loved spending time with. And, he and I enjoyed nature, and, we love animals. And, we were just very much kindred spirits when he was not drinking. And, that caused a psychological split. So I had to adjust myself depending upon the type of dad that I would experience on that particular day. My relationship with my brother, I didn't really have a very intimate relationship with my brother. My brother is, very much like a smart ass, very much a smart ass, very much kind of digs into people and, ruffles your feathers and that type of thing. But I always remember when I was younger, he would play fight with me and, test out all the latest and greatest wrestling moves, that he learned on television. And so that created a psychological split because he always taught me to defend myself, but he always created scenarios where he would, say things to me that were mean and, and teasing and that type of thing, and just kind of to get under my skin, so to speak. And so there was always that, split, between someone who's teaching me to defend myself, and then this is someone I need to defend myself against, so to speak. The only constant that I had in my life growing up really was my sister Tara. And so I really considered my sister Tara to be a soulmate. Soulmates are people who kind of resonate on your frequency. And so my sister and I are very alike when it comes to egos. She and I are very feminine energies. We're very selfless. We believe in giving to our family and to our friends to a fault, so to speak. And so, she and I are definitely, just a lot like that. So throughout my life, I always felt like giving so much to her because she gave so much to me. And I think that relationships like that work out because, most times when we find relationships in hell, it's all about one person giving and the other person taking. But when both of you are givers, no one feels that they're cheated, if you will, in a relationship. Everyone kind of gets what they need. And so I think that she and I very much had, a very good exchange between the both of us. It wasn't just giving something. It was, we always got back what we gave. And so I loved my sister very much growing up. So I just talk about my family, talk about, going to school and how I was somewhat of a social misfit at school. Very divergent, didn't really fit in with any particular faction, so to speak. I was very creative, and so I was in the choir. And, the choir was great because it really helped me with my self-expression, with verbal expression. And so, with verbal expression, growing up, I had a lot of issues with my throat chakra because I was always stifled as a kid from saying, my piece or saying my opinion or, things like that were definitely not, kids were seen but not heard. Seen but not heard. Yeah, Is that right? Yeah. In the home. And so, but it was this was also a psychological split, because also I used a lot of self-expression and singing in the choir. When I came home, I was stifled and shunned from doing that and expressing myself. And so I definitely had an imbalance, a psychological split that caused an imbalance within my throat chakra. And so, my throat chakra is definitely in balance. And that's why I'm really, writing this book and doing these videos, because I definitely need to get my voice out there. I definitely need to be heard before having to give up this mind and body in this incarnation. This is something that's off. I remember when I met my twin flame, I call it my twin soul, if you will, or my evil twin, because I'm so polarized with this other aspect of myself. But when I met my twin, in this incarnation, I got a dream. I had a dream that he put a gun to my throat and pulled the trigger. And so as soon as he did this, I woke up and he called. As soon as I had the dream, like after I woke up, he called. And so that was, in a way, my divine self saying, hey, your twin flame is going to, try to prevent you from talking, prevent you from speaking, if you will. Because, my twin and I are actually competing for the throne, so to speak. I consider my twin flame to be Judas, a Judas type figure, who sold me out on the astral for 30 pieces of silver, so to speak. So this is the so-called higher self, if you will, that lives on the astral. That's a very masculine aspect of me on the astral that just wants to destroy all light within himself, which is me, because I'm the light, but wants to destroy all light within himself so he can just inherit a kingdom of stuff and things, which is a very imbalanced kingdom. So, things are great, don't get me wrong. I do like things, but that's not the totality of who we are. And so it's that little glimpse of light that makes a diamond really shine, so to speak, like Beyonce said in her video, her song, Upgrade You. But, although I have that ideology with, balance, if you will, my twin is definitely very masculine and does not want any light at all within the universe, so to speak. And so, I really just talk about, the imbalances and psychological splits that created, the issues with my throat chakra. If you're not familiar with chakras are just energy systems, and so your throat is an energy system. Then another imbalance I have is my sacral, my earthly sacral. In fact, in the book, you will hear me mention the earthly sacral very often. The earthly sacral is just the energy system in the body that's responsible for your will. It's located near the genitals, and so your genitals are where your this particular chakra, I think it's called the Muladhara. When we think of Mula, we think of money. So this is the manifesting aspect of a being. And so when we descend into earth reality, we're descending as slaves. And so that earthly aspect that is responsible for manifesting things into the material is hijacked by the powers that be, so to speak. And so we're prevented from manifesting the way that we would want, because we're supposed to be within a severe environment of restriction here. And so because that was hijacked, and I constantly looked outside of myself for love, for money, whatever the case is, having to go and work a job, that type of thing. Anytime you're actually going, outside of yourself for something, and you're not able to manifest things with your will, the sacral is the seat of will, if you will. It's a perversion and an inversion, if you will, of the truth. And that's what this whole reality is about. This whole reality is about an inversion and a perversion of the truth. And I talk a little bit, not in this chapter, but overall in the book, how the elite, who govern this reality, how they've plateaued out of experiencing the material. They've shopped and, they've dined and they've, traveled too much. And so as a result, nothing seems new to them anymore. Life is like they have a poor existence. Although they have lots of money, they're very poor. And so they don't have love. And so since they don't have love, they don't really have anything. They just have to suck the life out of human beings and create a sense of suffering within us so they can feel better and have an emotional charge, if you will. And so they do, the way that they create the suffering is making us unholy. And so in this particular incarnation, I'm very feminine, but I have no masculine counterpart that holds in my energy. So pretty much I just bleed out energy, and I become very much, if you will, sensitive to people's energies around me. Everything is energy, including people. That may sound weird, but when people go to the hospital and their heart stops, they use it, what is it called, the defibrillator, where they shock people back to life with electricity. So your body's electricity, everything is electricity. But the thing is that I have difficulty living within the superficial realm now, because I don't really meet people anymore as their superficial ego. I meet people as their energetic person behind their mask. And so, even talking to people is difficult for me, because I have to reconcile their ego with all the filth that's behind it. So, I'm not in the best position to be in a body, so to speak, right now. I'm very much in the stratosphere and above the earth. But, the whole purpose is balance. And so, because, I was not given the opportunity, and I was purposely imbalanced as a child, and then also toward the end of my incarnation, certain tactics were done to force me more into the psychological feminine mind, to force me out of the body, if you will. I feel that it is important for me to actually get this story told, so my next avatar will be able to just know who she is, because in my next incarnation, I'm going to be stupid. Basically, I'm not going to have the melanin to actually stimulate the third eye enough to really understand the play of existence and the various aspects of it. So I just talk in the fall about my family, talk about growing up, being in school, my imbalances and psychological splits. One thing I do want to mention about my earthly sacral as well, around the age of 4 or 5, I believe, I had ulcers, stomach ulcers. Being sexually abused, and also witnessing, my dad being a raging alcoholic, and all the interactions I had with my family members in very dissociated types of ways, really, really imbalanced my sacral earthly aspect of myself. And so, I can't stress enough how my sacral was imbalanced, and how that really predicated all of the various poor decisions that I made later on in life. It's kind of like when we descend here into hell, we fail before we start, so to speak. We're made to fail before we start. And so, it's just inevitable when we meet our end. We look at the beginning. And so, if you're at a good start, like for example, when we die, whatever, I don't like to say die, but because there is no death really, but when we when we leave the mind and the body, if you will, we're purposely erased. Like our memories are erased, and so all the knowledge that you gained at the end of your incarnation gets taken away from you. And that's unfortunate, because if you had that knowledge, going into your next incarnation, you would ascend. You would not have to come back to hell, or earth reality, because you would live with more integrity, knowing exactly what the deal is. But because you're purposely made ignorant, going back to the book of Genesis and how it says that Adam, God caused a sleep to fall upon Adam. When you have ignorance, I think it's in the Gnostic text of the Gospel of Philip, it says ignorance is the mother of all evil. It is the mother of all evil. And so we just descend into earth reality very stupid and dumb. And that's done on purpose, because this whole system cannot be upheld with the truth, I do believe you have to have some truth in order to experience earth reality in its fullness. You can't experience it the way that you want without that element of truth with you. This whole reality is based upon glamour, it's based upon illusion and lies. And so, I talk about how the bafflement magicians of this world, how, when you gain truth and knowledge, you don't want to come to the magic show anymore. It doesn't wow you anymore. Well, it was never magic for me, but, like say if you had a wonderful life or what have you, and you incarnated and you had a whole lot of things, if you will, it's still a lie. And so you don't really get so wowed anymore by the magic show, because you can see right through it. You have very much, instead of gaining knowledge superficially, you have gained knowledge in an interdimensional, insightful way through your pineal gland, through your third eye. And so the creators of this rally know that. They know that when you gain knowledge, that you're not going to want to incarnate again, and that you won't feel the need or the desire to incarnate. And so they purposely erase our memories, and so we can't remember past lives and and things like that, because it's intended for us to stay down here, to stay here forever and become earthbound. And so it's very much unfortunate. I talk in this chapter about, after, I graduated from college, well, when I was in college, I met my ex-husband, and, I just talk about, marrying my ex-husband for the wrong reasons. We tend to, the thing is that when we make decisions in life, lots of our decisions are based upon what I call the id. And so the id is a conglomeration of unmanifested desires and tendencies. Freudian psychology calls it the id. I call it the inner child. Oftentimes I refer to it as that in the book. New Age literature refers to it as the inner child. But the inner child is basically the kid that was never truly mothered, the kid that didn't feel safe, especially, growing up seeing black men. I didn't really see black men particularly in a positive light as I was growing up, looking at the interactions my mom, my dad had, and the interactions that, women in my family had with their husbands and their boyfriends, and, seeing how, black people were portrayed on television with media and entertainment, things like that. I didn't really see, the, black men in the light that I should have seen him. And so as a result, when I met my ex-husband, I really looked to him to change that whole ideology that I had about the black man. I was really like, oh, wow, he's a up-and-coming attorney, and, he came from, what I thought at the time to be a good family, and he was just more even-keeled than I was. My ex-husband is very, what's the word? He's very, very intelligent, and, he's not as emotional as I am, so he's able to definitely make decisions with more of a level head. I really thought that he complimented me very well, and, all the things that I lacked, he compensated for. So, I just really looked to him to make, to heal the little girl that was in my head. And so I didn't marry him, but the little girl married him. And that's a tall order for somebody, to say, hey, I although I didn't say to him, on our wedding day, I want you to heal my inner child. That's really what was happening. That's what my whole, soul was implying, if you will. And, we got divorced. There was a lot of infidelity, in their marriage. And, he was definitely unfaithful to me a lot. And, I really tried to hold on to this man because I felt, regardless of what, I could make it work. If I loved him enough, if I, championed his career, he had a difficulty getting his career off the ground. And so I was always in his corner, always trying to be the best wife. And I felt that if I did my part, that he would actually do his part. But it definitely did not work out for me in the long run. And so we got divorced, I think in 2014 we got divorced, but 2012 we separated. And so I really came to, understand during this time with our legal separation, that no one was going to make me happy. No one was going to make me happy. I had my daughter. We had our daughter at that time, and, You know, I love my daughter to death. You know, she's a beautiful soul. Very happy, loving, jovial child. You know, when I first had my daughter, it really scared the hell out of me because her light was so bright. You know, she was such a bright soul. And so I didn't really have the ability to mother myself. So it was very difficult for me to mother her at first. You know, I didn't know if I was equipped to do so with all the suffering that I had gone through as a kid. But, you know, I definitely fell into my mother role and took up more pride in being a mom. But, you know, looking at even that relationship, you know, my marriage, my daughter, you know, my career, you know, my friends, nothing really made me happy. And so when I got legally separated in 2012, I underwent a shift. And so this was pretty much the shift that I would go through to lead me back to myself. So that's pretty much the end of this chapter, the end of the fall, just showing you how Adam and Eve within my life was separated, my spiritual and my earthly aspect of myself, and all the various constructs that were integral to that separation. And so in this next chapter, I talk about how my life went to definitely a downward spiral. You know, the New Age disguises itself as, you know, encouraging consciousness and helping people to become conscious. But in actuality, the New Age is the deception. It's not about you finding consciousness at all. And so to be conscious is to be knowledgeable about yourself and to know thyself. But there's just so many things that are put in place to prevent you from uniting with your unconscious self. And I expose a lot of that in this chapter. I'm a very feminine, right brain inflated person. And so because I'm very right brain inflated and very left brain earthly deflated, this movement pushed me so much into the stratosphere of being feminine that I lost my balance and I went through a psychosis, a period of insanity, if you will. Because, you know, the thing is, I think it's Sadhguru, he's a spiritual teacher. He says that he's a mystic. I think Sadhguru identifies himself as a mystic. I don't know. But he, you know, when I started to look at the spiritual teacher named Sadhguru, he said something one time that resonated with me. He said that whenever you're pushing the intellect, if you push it past a certain point, you will crack up. And so I became so feminine, you know, so much on a love crusade and just neglected myself and so forth. You know, I ate a vegan diet and meditated and did all these different feminine spiritual practices that it actually almost pushed me out of my body and made me leave the body. So, you know, and I went through a period of psychosis, and I talk about that. So, you know, people could really relate to my experience and to see past the smoking mirrors, if you will, of the New Age movement and how the false creators, you know, the creators of this false reality, how they created the New Age to actually kill Eve, to kill the feminine right brain aspect so the universe would have no balance of knowledge, but just have that masculine energy to permeate the universe forever. So thank you guys so much for listening, and please look in the comment section to click on a link to purchase your book. And thank you so much. I'll see you in my next video.